Hi and welcome to a quick guide for the Reflectrial Ricardo fight. There's no time limit on the availability of the content since it's from a bookag, but it's harder than Wufo and more of a collection check, which you especially get to feel in the hard mode version where Ricardo will dish out a big chunk of damage. So if you're missing too many IDs or struggling a bit too much and don't want to hammer your head against the wall, you can always come back to this later. You're not missing out too much, especially since you can get the more important rewards, especially the uptime module already from just doing the normal mode. Once again, the boss is separated in two distinct phases that favor specific teams. The first phase incentivizes a middle team. We will change Ricardo's first and second pattern and gain 2 every ego resource if we bring 4+ middle IDs at stage start. And it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a huge tempo since it is so much VSP for your team and less SP for Ricardo. Additionally, we do not get paralyzed if the ID uses a defense skill, which is great for counters, and bleed and envy skills deal more damage. Lastly, if we achieve an absolute resonance, we gain 1 ego resource of the one we own the least 4 times. So very obviously, we want to bring as many middle IDs as possible. But at the time of release, we only have 5 of those. So who else do we bring? First great candidate is Multi-Crack Faust. Not only does she have some envy fragility on her skill 3, she also has access to Hexnail for more envy fragility and I guess some bleed count, and good old Fluid Sack. Otherwise, I guess you could bring Wing Faust as a good alternative, at least it's a skill 2 with Envy. If you bring Wing Faust, you probably would also want to bring Hong Ludo. Since you're incentivized to lean into bleeding anyways, Wing Rodion has Envy on skill 2 and will help the bleed count a lot thanks to the Sanguine Desire. It might be kinda the only way to even keep a stack up, since the middle team itself does not have the greatest count application. Otherwise, Better as Yoshi is a good choice. If not to fill the slot, just a good charge ID, get like Hohenheim Quagga or get a Reindeer, anything with some nice envy at least. And if you should like Metal Dawn, Queen of Fatal Dawn is still a great replacement for her. Should you totally lack a metal team, then very much good luck. And the next best thing would be just a general bleed team, especially a wing team. And if not, you could try like a Sinking Butterfly team, but this is starting to be very suboptimal and you might consider waiting. For Egos, if possible, bring Screaming Sheep on Mason. Envy damage up and charge for any charge ID is just very great. Otherwise, you can bring Binds or Heathcliff, that gives you offense and defense up from his passive, as well as his Vex Ego. Then, as mentioned, just all the Hexnail Egos are pretty good. And anything with Envy pretty much. Especially also something like a Scissors Ego for Otis, which should have a middle ID sometime in the future TM. Second phase, we'll get Ego resources in Absolute Resonance, just like phase 1. Now though, Rupture and Gluttony are buffed, and all H-Corp IDs get an additional damage buff, and damage reduction from enemies. Finally, we get a damage bonus against Ricardo while he is staggered if we have higher speed. That's capped overall by a difference of 10. Once again, the game is more or less pointing out what to bring for an easy time, so we'll bring the high shoes. If you have all of them, the priority for fielding should be Lord Lu, the Mao high shoes and the Shi high shoes. The last slot then could be W Corp Yisang or something like Haishu Yisang with an Ishmael. If you run Yisang, you want a Dimension Shredder Ego on him, so he is still great for your account. Other candidates then the high shoes is somebody like a Sync Mercor, of the Spirit a W Corp team, I guess. For Egos, I personally got carried by Ebony Stem as a nuke, but there are enough AoE Rupture Egos and any of them are just great to bring. Otherwise, a Fascinant Corrosion for Hong Lu is a great clasher, and Tarnished Blood on him is a big AoE nuke that's once again great to have, and will also make him tank a big hit. Then he also has the Lasho Egos, and otherwise, for Rupture itself, we can have Quackers AADD or, just as mentioned, Yisang's Dimension Shredder. Now to the actual fight. If you power the middle team, you will get 10 free sanity turn 1 and Ricardo will sink his SP by 20 turn 2. An early Superbia for Fluid Sack is still good tempo though, especially since its evade clash is high if you don't have set it. The middle will ignore getting paralyzed if they counter, and you take general less damage. So as long as you just keep using defense skills, you can take most of his skills head on and just avoid taking suffering to the face. Ricardo is generally clashing high and will deal more damage the longer the fight lasts, thanks to written in the book. So we want to maximize damage with empowering our envy skills to not throw it out. Middleman Source and Multicrack Faust apply envy fragility with the skills freeze on the next turns. And Masor's Screaming Sheep Eagle will give envy damage for the current turn, so many ways to just maximize for one big nuke turn. Once you have enough Sin resources saved up, another strategy can be using Sanguine Desire a few turns in a row to get an actual bleed stack going and bleed him out that way. Once you get him to halfway, he will spawn S and change to the second phase where we want to switch teams. Mechanically, Ricardo doesn't change during the second phase, he's just a DPS phase still. Now we have the Mooks and Werner on the field though, and Werner gets overall also more powerful the longer the fight lasts, and the allies will give buffs once they die. And while you could originally ignore the allies and just keep them alive, we want to rip off the band-aid as quickly as possible, because Ricardo will keep spawning ads even if we don't kill him, which is a bit different compared to the original fight. The easiest way to achieve that is abusing the 100% extra damage our Gluttony and Rapture Egos do. Personally, I used Ebony Stem. Another good tech is to use Mauerfaust's counter for the 3 assist attack every turn, so you have a bit more skill economy. And otherwise, binding down Ricardo before he gets staggered is a great damage increase, so either use your mouse or ego. Overall, the Hydra should be a lot more squishy than the middle, so planning for a long fight is even less of great advice. So there's no reason to save up ego resources too much, especially since we still can somewhat replenish them with Gluttony Absolute Resonances. So nuke him down, and that should hopefully be it. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.